Good evening and welcome to the 92nd Street Y. I'm Deborah Edel and I'm proud to serve as a board member to this important institution. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's timely program. As the world's premier Jewish community and cultural center, we believe at the 92 NY that civil and informed dialogue, especially around Israel, is essential to our community and indeed the world. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speakers who will be bringing their insights and wisdom to the stage tonight. Bernard-Henri Lévy is a French philosopher, director of 8 films, and author of 48 books. Indeed, he's one of the West's foremost intellectuals, defending democracy and humanism against totalitarianism and fascism. On October 8th, 2023, as you will hear, he traveled to Israel to bear witness to the unprecedented invasion and outright massacre committed by Hamas. What he saw shook him to his core. Weaving in some 50 years of personal history with the country, his newest book, Israel Alone, paints the portrait of a nation with its back to the wall, yet still full of hope. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Thomas S. Kaplan. He is an entrepreneur, community leader, philanthropist, and environmentalist. A past president and chairman of the 92nd Street Y, he is the founder and former executive chairman of Panthera, a global leader in big cat conservation, and the founder of Leiden Collection, the world's largest private collection of Rembrandt and Dutch Golden Age art. Many will recognize Tom as a frequent introducer of our guests as chairman of 92 NY Talks. Other interviews in which he has participated include a riveting conversation with Bernard-Henri Lévy on our debt to the Kurdish people, as well as a more recent one in Israel and Iran with Norman Rule, who served for 34 years in the CIA, managing different programs relating to the Middle East. We have time for a few questions from the audience tonight. Please write on the cards if you're here with us in person, or write in the chat if you're tuning in on the live stream. Israel Alone is on sale in our lobby. Following our talk, Mr. Lévy has graciously agreed to stay on and sign books in our lounge next door. We hope you'll join us. It is my deep honor to have these esteemed guests on our stage. Please give the warmest 92 NY welcome to Tom Kaplan and Bernard-Henri Lévy.
Here we are back again. 5 years ago, almost to the day, we had an event that was celebrating the Kurdish people, because that's how we bonded. We bonded over an ethnic Muslim minority, the largest disenfranchised ethnic group in the world. 2 Jews with Emily Hamilton, the heart and soul of Justice for Kurds, myself as chairman, you as president, fighting for a Muslim minority. That's not new for you. Candidly, it's not new for me either, because I have been an activist to the extent that I've been an activist, primarily with regard to opposing the Ayatollahs and the regime in Tehran. But you have risked your life. You had your crucible supporting the Bengali Muslims who were being subjected to genocide in 1971 by Yahya Khan's Pakistan. You nearly were killed in Sarajevo, not to mention Libya, not to mention Somalia, not to mention Afghanistan. And of course, being on the front line with the Kurds and the films that you made, The Fight for Mosul and Peshmerga, all for the benefit of Muslims. There aren't very many, if any, people in the world, including Muslims, who have done more to exhibit that Jewish conscience of tikkun olam and of being alive to the prospect of true humanism, loving people for people, tolerance, building bridges between other cultures. We united in that common cause, that common affinity. What is it about Jews that can allow them to feel that need to be able to reach out to the other, knowing full well that in rare occasions, the Kurds being perhaps the most prominent in that sense, there will be no gratification from that. There's no self-interest. And yet you do it. And you do it over and over again. What motivates someone to be that magnificent in their humanity?
I think that this is what being a Jew means. And I will give you two examples which are with me all the time and that were with me all my life. The example, first of all, of the most, for me, the strangest and the most brilliant prophet of the Torah, Jonah. Jonah is the only prophet in the Torah that goes and addresses not his people, but another people, and even a people whom he knows, who is going to be one day the enemy of his people, who is people of Nineveh, Mosul. Jonah takes the road, takes the sea, goes in the belly of the whale in order to address, in order to obtain a teshuvah, in a way, from the most remote people that can be conceived at that time. For me, I know a little Torah, not so well, but a little. Jonah is the most, the strangest, the most mysterious, and the most fertile from an intelligence of all the prophets of the Bible, number one. And number two, there is a word of Rashi, the most profound of the commentators of the Torah, who says that to be a Jew consists in reading every letter of the Torah, every letter, A, B, Aleph, Bet, as if it had 70 faces. This is what Rashi says, not once, few times. To be a Jew means reading every text, every sentence, every word, every letter of every word, as if it had 70 faces. Faces, of course, but 70, which is the number of the nations. 70 is the number of the nations who, while Abraham is on one side, on one bank of the river, are on the other bank. And a Jew is someone who, in every letter, sees the mirror of the 70s. So this is being a Jew. Of course, a Jew has also to deal with his own constituency, his own people. That's what I do, that's what you do, that's what we do now since October 7. We spoke so often, you and me, in Paris, in New York. We are obsessed, haunted by this and by our duties regarding our people, of course. But this is probably not the essence of us being a Jew. When we go to the Kurds, when we devote such an energy in order to encourage, reinforce, weaponize these great Muslim community people who embody the enlightenment inside Islam, we are really Jews. So that's what I think. It's not, of course, it's a matter of humanism. I am, you are, we all are humanists, but this is an easy reply. Humanism, thanks God, has become the common denominator of every lady or gentleman of goodwill. But we are Jews. Being a Jew means forming, with Emily Hamilton, this NGO devoted to deal with this part of Islam, which is a spark of light and of hope. And it's our job.
And you do it brilliantly. And you do it even under duress. I need to remind the audience, although I'm sure that many of you know, that tonight is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. And several days ago, we witnessed a modern-day pogrom in Western Europe. A country, in fact, that I hold very dear. As you heard in the introduction, I have been not only a collector of art, but a promoter of the Dutch Golden Age, 17th century art and culture all over the world. In fact, the Dutch have recognized me. And as Bernard-Henri noticed, when he saw my lapel, I wasn't wearing a French Legion of Honor, I was wearing a Dutch Legion of Honor, which was given to me as part of the Royal Order of Orange. And the reason was because I am viewed as being one of the most serious promoters of Dutch culture all over the world, from Europe to China to Russia to the Arab world. And I was given this recognition, not because I sought it. I was doing what I wanted to do out of passion. Next spring, my family is slated to hold an exhibition in Amsterdam, one of the largest art exhibitions that will take place in this very important year, the 750th anniversary of Amsterdam. The reason why I'm wearing this is to send two messages. Number one, I do have a huge appreciation for the Dutch culture, and I do believe that events in the Netherlands will probably do a lot to focus their minds on whether or not that culture, that Dutchness, is worth preserving. But I, for one, will be watching very, very intently to see that the words, which have been incredibly strong and supportive of the Jewish community, will be matched by deeds. And I am heartened by the fact that the king himself didn't make a mealy-mouthed assertion calling for peace and tranquility and de-escalation. And he said very simply, we failed the Jewish community in World War II, and we failed them again this week. Those are strong words. And I believe that the Dutch will follow that with action. I can certainly say, if they don't, then I'm sure a lot of people to whom they owe a lot of gratitude will express their displeasure. I'm not saying that as a threat, because I really do have confidence that the Dutch will do the right thing. But this, again, was an example of having that sense of just doing the right thing. Jewish Americans working to use art to build bridges between cultures. In our case, all over the world, places that had never experienced Dutch art, and they were blockbusters. One of the things that we've seen in the United States, particularly, and we're very sensitive to this because Jews have been at the forefront of civil rights, at the forefront of what we would call liberal values, open society values, is that there were a number of constituencies that instead of rising to be able to express with a sense of opportunity the gratitude that they should have for us as having been allies in their time of need, sat back. I don't have to tell you, because you are doing the most monumental campus tour in the United States and in Canada. The level of ignorance about the Jewish contribution to everyone's lives has never been lower. To the contrary, social media has given people the opportunity to hate Jews for almost any reason. If you're a white supremacist, then we are people who love black people. I got that expression when I was a boy in Florida, and the expression that was used was not black people. You're a blank lover, because my friends were black. If you're blacks, increasingly you hear that Jews are white settler colonialists. If you are a capitalist, Jews are liberal, Bolsheviks. And if you're a Bolshevik, Jews are the uber-capitalists. Social media, more than anything else, has allowed all those people who have within them the bigotry that they wish to express. The Jew is one-stop shopping. How do you explain that?
First of all, yes, it's a fact. Jews are under attack everywhere in the West. Amsterdam is clear, and it was the tipping point and the climax of this whole segment of time. And it should be, by the way, probably a wake-up call for all of us in Europe and in America. This can happen when you speak of a global intifada, when you present Hamas as the liberation movement and a movement of resistance, when you plead that October 7 has a context and should be, if not excused, at least be contextualized and understood, when you chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you must expect what has been not only done, but planned day before yesterday in Amsterdam. There will be a before and an after, and I hope that there will not be too much an after, because we will take the lessons for what happened in Amsterdam on the day, 2 days before anniversary of Kristallnacht. Number two, you are right again, it's a question of gratitude. In America and in France, it is the same. France also owes so much to the Jews. France owes its social contract to the Jews. What is very little known is that the true pattern of the social contract à la Jean-Jacques Rousseau or French Revolution, the real one in the work of the political philosophers of the before Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was the kingdom of the Hebrews. This is unknown. It was covered by the French Revolution, but it is the reality. The French language owes a lot to Rachi, the same who said that 70 faces in each letter, for some reasons in detail of which I will not enter, but the French language owes a lot to him. So there is a depth in France, in America, toward the Jews. And this debt is, we are in a moment when it is refused. It is denied. Don't want to hear. This happens often in life. When you owe too much to someone, there is a famous word of a famous playwright in France who said, but why does he hate me so much? I did not do so much good to him. He should not hate me so much. I was not so good to him. Okay. We probably did such an amount of good things for America and for France, and both, that this could be an explanation. And last point, what I see today, even among those who don't attack clearly the Jews, there are demonstrations in the campuses. That's why I'm making this crazy tour. Demonstrations, harassment of the Jewish students. We were together yesterday night in Harvard. We saw the disarray of the Jewish students who really fear, in danger. They feel that they are the only, that every single minority on campuses are protected, are the possibility to inhabit a safe space, except them. But even from the part of those who don't attack really in front, there is a new phenomenon in America and in France. The Jews have lived a long time since the French Revolution, maybe American Revolution, where the Jews were unconditionally protected. In America, in France, the Jews are protected without condition. This is one of the characteristics of our social contracts. Jews have had this after centuries of persecution, of suffering, and so on. The modern age for Jews was an age of unconditional protection. I think that this age is coming to an end. I take the example of America. And I watched with great concern the debates of the last weeks, last month and last weeks, since October 7 and since the beginning of the presidential campaign, which ended a few days ago. I listened to the Democrats since October 7. A lot of them say Jews deserve a protection. They have to be protected. Attacking them is absolutely condemnable under one condition, that they take distance to the state of Israel. Under one condition, that is that they are not too much Zionist. Under one condition, they have to say, like a sesame, like an opening word, I don't like Netanyahu. Whatever you think about Netanyahu, it's not the question. Among the Democrats, I saw that the same should be said in France, by the way, but we are here in New York. A lot of them saying there is one condition to be protected, which is to be at a reasonable distance of the colonialist, apartheid, genocidal state of Israel. On the Republican side, I was there during the meeting of President Trump in Washington, D.C. I even opened it. AIC. Emily, AIC? IAC. IAC. I was there. And the President Trump said a sentence which did not escape to all of you. I'm sure. He said, beware. If I lose, you will be responsible. And if you are responsible and if I lose, the state of Israel will disappear and you with it within 2 years. So he said symmetrically to the Democrats. He said to the Jews, you are protected, you will be safe, you and Israel, because he does not dissociate. You will be safe, but under one condition, which is to support me. It was what he said in Washington, D.C., in a more subtle way, maybe, but it was the. So in the two cases, I really had this feeling that the good, old, brave, unconditional protection, which is due to the Jews, belongs to an age which is vanishing, which is disappearing. This is really the concern which the students whom I meet in Stanford, in UCLA, in University of Michigan, in Pomona, I don't know where, I was in so many places, this is what they feel. The source of the anxiety, disarray, anxiety, fear, which I felt among these students, so Americans, is there. They feel that for the first time since long, they are no longer unconditionally protected. And same should be said and could be said about France and the rest of Europe. This is our condition in this, our condition. Our escapable condition, we have to fight against it. We can reverse. Nothing is ever written. That's why we are here. That's why I'm spending with your help and the help of Daphne Recanati, your wife, Kaplan Recanati, with your help. That's why I'm making all this tour in America. It can be reversed, but it is the situation.
I do agree with you completely that this can be reversed. There are two aspects to that. First of all, and it is interesting as you put forward that the contributions of Jews, we're often told, those who are in the front lines of putting forward why Jews are a good thing, we're often told the argument, play down the accomplishments, because the accomplishments either create envy or they reconfirm that there is something about the Jews that, they have space lasers. And the problem is that it puts one hand behind our back, because it is a fact that of the 1,000 or so Nobel Prizes given over the last century or so, roughly 220 of them have gone to Jews. Jews represent maybe 0.2% of the global population. Now, those Nobel Prizes are not wishy-washy things. Most of those prizes were given for very, very hard core subjects, sciences, math, medicine, which by definition are universal in their application. Many, many more non-Jews have been saved by vaccines created by Jews, or the technology, or the Intel chip created in Israel. Now, the Jewish population has not exceeded 15 or 16 million since before the Second World War. In fact, we're not back to those levels yet. It's the only population in the world that is less than where it was in 1939. Nonetheless, the contributions continued. After 1939, you have the creation of Israel in 1948, and Israel is one of the great bastions of a truly modern society and an open society. Those who would argue as queers for Palestine clearly don't understand what would happen to them in Palestine. They don't understand that the primary supporter of the Islamist movements within Palestine, Iran, The Jews who would be on those gay pride parades and hanging off of each other and having fun. In Tehran, they're hanging from a Caterpillar tractor, a crane, or being thrown off a rooftop. Feminists for Palestine? Come on. You know, the only comment that I would make about that is if people really want to make a stand on something that is relevant to today's age, instead of spending their time on campuses essentially aiding and abetting a terrorist organization which is part of a spider's web of Islamist, not Islamic, Islamist organizations that have as their desire the destruction of Israel and the United States. And in their alliance with Hezbollah and the Popular Mobilization Units in Iraq and the Houthis, they have American blood on their hands. Children, don't try this at home because you're clearly not understanding what's really the great motivator here. And you know I focus a lot on Iran, and I always have. And in fact, the last time we were here together, the subject of the discussion was, is never again just a slogan? I know, you're smiling. I can't help it. And I gave a little bit of a initially it was about the Kurds, but at the end of it I said, if you were to ask me where I thought the next genocide could occur, it would be between Israel and Iran. And it's a theme that I continued when I had that discussion that was referenced with Norman Rule, who interviewed me on the subject earlier this year of Iran and Israel, is war inevitable? Those who don't understand the nature of our enemy, theoretically they have to be educated or they have to be slapped. I would ask you, if you knew that somebody was on the same airplane as you, who was out there chanting from the river to the sea, pro-Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organization in this country, in league with other terrorist organizations that have American blood on their hands, would you want to fly with them? I wouldn't. Why shouldn't they be on a no-fly list? I don't mind being labeled a Zionist, no problem. But if I'm going to be allied with people who slaughter innocents, who gang rape young girls, who kidnap old people, who burn children, shoot babies in their beds, those people should be on a no-fly list. Don't you think? That's a rhetorical question. What I really want to point out is that you speak about the ability to fight back, and I'm with you. I believe that this war against ignorance can be won. I believe that there is a silent majority who are absolutely willing to stand up for the Jews once they see Jews fight back. And this whole ethos that we should keep our heads down, not make waves, we've seen, because we had our own October 7th, what happens when you don't stand up and say, we're here, we are making a far greater contribution than almost any other group in this country. We're not asking for gratitude, but the least you could do is stand up and say that we have a right to exist, and that the country that is our ancestral homeland for thousands of years has a right to exist. A country that was created by the United Nations. It's the other side that launched this war on October 7th. It was Hezbollah that followed in that war. The fact that the Israelis have managed, because they're so resilient and because they are so ingenious, to be able to defang two of the biggest terrorist organizations in the world, gives an opportunity for everyone in this room to ask of their Jewish community, what can we do to be able to fight? The Israelis have used their air power and they have created a safe space for us to be able to fight back. And one of the reasons why, pogroms in Western Europe notwithstanding, one of the reasons why there has been so little reaction to what the Israelis did in Lebanon, which will go down in history as one of the greatest 180-degree turns in military history, is because the Israelis are winning. Now, you and I were both in Israel within a 2-week period around October 7th. I was there a week before. I was there a week before October 7th. And I met, because of my relationships there, with the chief of staff of the military, the head of military intelligence, the head of the Mossad. Head of the Mossad absolutely got it. The other two, whose careers are over, will be. As you know, for years, I have tried to pound the table about understanding the nature of the proxies and pounding the table both to my Gulf Arab friends and to the Israelis. There's going to be a miscalculation of the proxies that's going to create a reaction from Israel that will spiral towards a regional war. Tell the Iranians to calm down. By the time I went to see our mutual friend, the president, Bougie Herzog, I visited him in Jerusalem, and I said, Bibi has destroyed Israel's deterrence vis-a-vis Iran. I know the Iranians. They are sitting in Tehran, and they are just deciding, are we going to basically let the Jews do what they often do historically when given the chance of self-government, which is to cannibalize themselves and implode, or do we go for the throat? A week later, we had October 7th, and we got our answer. It's a little bit more complex than that, but we got our answer. That was my experience in Israel. Frustration that the military was so complacent, frustration that in the face of the existential threat, the Israeli government instead chose to divide the country in a way that invited October 7th. Fine. Several days later, you were in Israel after the carnage, after the catastrophe, after our Nakba. You saw so quickly how the world turned on Israel. You saw Israel alone. Can you describe what you saw and how you felt in the immediate aftermath of October 7th?
One word first about what you said at the beginning about the numbers. Numbers of Jews in America. This is very important. It is one of the components of the spirit of Judaism and of the genius of Judaism. That number does not matter. This is very important. That's why the people become crazy, because in fact it does not matter. And there is again a great quote of a great Talmudist, the Maharal of Prague, who says that the difference between Israel and all the kingdoms around is that, and in the world, the kingdoms and the nations, they are space, extension. Israel and the Jews are, Maharal says that, just a point. It's not a matter of numbers. So we can have the best science, we can have the best inventions in Israel, all that you said, without consideration of the number. Just one point aside. And another point, by the way, about the scientists, I think I concluded from my tour, the first half of my tour in the campuses, about the Nobel Prizes. If Einstein today applied a young Einstein to any of those universities which I visited, I'm not sure he will be endorsed and enlisted and authorized to teach. I'm not sure. In the atmosphere which is characterized as woke, he would probably be too white, too Jew, too sophisticated. I'm not sure he will be in. About Hamas, Hezbollah, the war. I don't know if the word proxy itself is so appropriate. I give you the point about Iran. You said it since 20 years. You are fighting and often alone against Iran. But it's Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi, militias in Iraq, in Syria, we know them well. I saw them when I made Peshmerga. They are more than proxies. All of that is a system. It's not only, it's an empire, which center is Iran, your theory of octopus, and they are part of the system. It's a whole. It's a whole system, structure of power. If it was just proxy, it's okay, a proxy, you lose a proxy, you invent another one. It's more than that. It's about my experience of Israel just after October 7. What I felt is, first of all, and this is the beginning of Israel Alone, of my book, is one of the worst sorrows of my life. To enter in the kibbutz of Kfar Aza, in the kibbutz of Be'eri, 4 days, I was in Israel the day after. I was in the kibbutzim 4 days after the massacre. To be there when there was still some fight going on, still some terrorists in the house. To be there at a moment where the Jewish deads have been buried, except here and there, in storage, some pieces of bodies which had been split and non-attributed, and waiting for a decent human and Jewish funeral, to see these pieces of Jewish flesh stocked, piled in a storage for cucumbers, it was honestly an emotion and a sorrow which I don't wish to my worst enemies. My worst enemy, and I have a lot of enemies, but I don't wish them that. Number two, what I immediately understood is that in this war, which was going to be the most difficult, the most complex, the most difficult to win of all the wars which Israel had to wage, I understood very quickly that Israel will be alone. And Israelis knew that also. I saw President Herzog. I saw the Prime Minister after. I saw his opponents, his rivals, most of them. There are one or two of them are, I pretend, I hope, they are my friends, I hope to be theirs. I met them. I met the survivors of Kfar Aza. I spent time with the families of the hostage. And the general feeling was that Israel will have to fight this so hugely difficult war alone. and alone even with allies. Because, of course, Israel has some allies, but nevertheless is alone. This was my feeling during these days. And my last feeling, I was wandering in Gaza. I was staying in Sderot, and I heard the news coming from Cornell University, from Harvard, from La Sorbonne, from Sciences Po, and I understood that instead of manifesting, of expressing solidarity, brotherhood, compassion, sorrow, the public opinions in the most sophisticated country, those whom I love most, America, France and America, there was solidarity expressed with those who did these atrocities. And really, I spent few of the most painful weeks of my life during that stay in Israel. And my book, Israel Alone, stems from there. I decided to write it. I knew that all my life, my life of writer, I knew that one day I will write a book about Israel. I had a secret rendezvous with one book about Israel, but I delayed it. Since 45 years, I wrote 48 books. I knew that the book will arrive, but I delayed it. For many reasons, I delayed. And I knew that I had still a long time to live, so it was okay. On October 8th, or the following days, I concluded, I was sure that the time was here, that I had to make it. And this book starts as an oath, a promise made to my friends in Israel, made to myself, to honor at that point of the day, not yet, at that point of the day, my old and secret rendezvous. This is my reply, my dear brother.
My dear brother, you never fail to move me to make me a better man, to make me want to strive more. It doesn't take much to get me riled up. It doesn't take much to elicit a sense of outrage. In my case, it can be a consequence of the desecration of Jews. It could also be the desecration of cultural heritage, the desecration of sacred environmental ecosystems. Your life as an activist has led you to be a rather famous war correspondent. A few days after October 7th, I was having dinner with the former president of Iraq here in New York. He had been president during the time of the Daesh phenomenon, the ISIS phenomenon. And I asked him how to compare what happened in October 7th. And this was only a few days after, long before we really knew what had happened. And his comment was, what was done to the Jews was worse than what was done to the Iraqis by ISIS. It's an incredible indictment. And I want to take this moment because neither you nor I are Islamophobes. We're not.
Of course not.
To the contrary, we were bonded by an affinity for a Muslim minority. You had a long history of championing the causes of justice for Muslim populations. My affinity, particularly in the Arab Gulf for decades, and of course, for fighting against Iran. To be an Islamophobe is to be ignorant. It is not to understand. I'm not saying that Islam is a religion of peace. It isn't. Neither is Christianity. And neither was the Old Testament religion of the Hebrews, or the Jews. Monotheism lends itself, like communism and fascism, to a certain amount of intolerance. And the world works in cycles. However, I would say this, in the same way as one does not have to be a Germanophobe to hate Nazis, one does not have to be an Islamophobe to be an Islamist phobe. And for any of you who don't understand that, that means the application of a political Islam which is meant to achieve political power. Now, unfortunately, political Islam, whether it's of the Shia or Sunni variety, has become very focused on the destruction of Israel and Jews in a wider nature, pushing the United States, the great Satan, out of the Middle East. And candidly, as we see in issues that we've seen now in Europe, to a certain extent in the United States, being able to push an agenda which is quite radical. And there have been, Christian radicals throughout the centuries. We're now, unfortunately, experiencing something that really wasn't seen in Islam for a very long time. Islam is due for a reformation. And you now see voices out of the Gulf, out of Egypt, out of what we would call the moderate Arab world, looking to be able to create a new connection with modernism, particularly led by the Gulf states, because they have the capacity, they have the wealth to do so. But in the meantime, we do have to deal with an Islamist agenda. Now, you were early in pointing out in your book about the Empire of the Five Kings what was going to happen with this coalition of those outside the liberal free world. If you could just explain that and where you see us now in that context, because so much of that has proven to be prescient.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the contemporary ideas which I hate most is the idea of clash of civilization, which was defended 20 years ago, proposed 20 years ago by an American scholar, Samuel Huntington. I think that it is an absurd idea, that it consists in believing that humanity is constituted of consistent and homogeneous blocks, that these blocks are unbridgeable, that between the Muslim world and the Western world, between the Asia and America, they are like Leibniz monades closed on each other with no possible communication. This, for me, is the most unsophisticated, unintelligent, and scary ideas which I know. This has been since 30 years one of the guidelines of my philosophical life, to hunt in every possible corner I found it, a remnants of this idea of big blocks of civilizations opposed to each other. I believe in bridge. I believe in insemination of pieces of one block in the other one. I believe that the so-called Western values were born in the East and in the neighborhood of Jerusalem. I believe in this Brownian movement of ideas which defy the law of the blocks. That's why I cannot be, and I would never be, an enemy of the Arab world. I have been all my life, hope, able to see, on the contrary, what makes me brother of those who defend liberty, who defend human rights today in Tehran, in Iraq, in Mosul. I devoted some time of my recent life shooting a movie in Iraq. I filmed the liberation of Mosul, and I did it as if it were liberation of part of my heart. So this, for me, is a data, and I really don't know any border of this being. What was your precise question? I'm sorry. At the end. Your question was?
About the five kings.
About the five kings, yeah. The only clash of civilization which I know, there is one clash of civilization, which is the clash between democracy and autocracy, which is the clash between, on one side, all those among the West, among the rest, in America, in Iran, in Turkey, who recognize themselves in the values of equality between genders, between the conditions and so on one side, and on the other side, autocracy, those whom I call the five kings, who form a bloc, but not a bloc of civilization, a political bloc. And this political bloc is made of the bloc of the stupid Ayatollah who hunt women because they put a lipstick, is formed by the squadrons of Vladimir Putin, who helped October 7 to be prepared and to celebrate October 7 a few weeks after it happened. It composed of the back office of China, illiberal China, autocratic China, who is associated with the two, with Iran and with Russia in the same club. Inside this bloc, you have the autocrats, who dominate, who occupied Lebanon under Hezbollah, who put into slavery the Gazan people under Hamas, who broke the democratic movement that was going on, put into motion in Afghanistan. These are the fourth part of the second bloc: Iran, Russia, China, the Islamist Sunni dictatorship, which I just mentioned. And fifth, a country who pretends to be in and out, in NATO, and associated and praising Putin, and defending Hamas, and supporting October 7, and saying that it was a day of liberation, who is Mr. Erdogan, the neo-sultan of the neo-Ottoman Empire. So these five compose a bloc, not a bloc of civilization again, a bloc of autocracy, a bloc of common hatred for all that is free, living, and dignified in our countries and in theirs. And between these two blocs, I believe that there is a merciless opposition and war. And in the Bible again, you have the premonition and the display of that war. There is, in the Torah, two wars of, not the West, Israel, and the five kings. One is led by Abraham. The purpose of this war was to liberate, to free his nephew Lot. And the other one is Josué, le livre de Josué, against the five kingdoms of Philistine. So all along the modern history, which starts 35 centuries ago, you have this fight, this war between these two political forces. On one side, the free, respectful to the law, respectful to the name of the human on one side, and the lovers of force, of idolatry, of despise on the other side. This is an old story which is going on today. And the bloc today, the bloc of the five, is probably stronger than ever. Maybe we came back at the time, to the time of Josué. The five blocs were very, very strong. It led Josué to pronounce terrible words about the end of this war. By the way, I will not repeat them here. But we are at this stage of history. And it's a huge responsibility which is on the shoulders of each of us. And those who are in administration probably more than us. Huge responsibility, huge crucial crossroads of our time where we are now. War between democracy and the five. Plus the North Korean guy, the Pusa, the little Pusa with nuclear weapons, with nuclear toys, with the newcomer in the club of the five, and who is probably not the less dangerous. Voilà, my dear friend, my dear Tom.
Voilà.
French citizen, by the way, Mr. Kaplan.
Indeed. Thank you. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that, if not the majority, but the plurality of the questions that were asked relate to my particular focus, which is Iran. Iran, simply put, represents the greatest existential threat to the Jewish people, both to Israel, which for the first time ever, going back at least 2,000 years, the Israeli state will have more Jews than the diaspora. And that's a big deal. Whatever you may feel about Israeli politics, the reality is that Israel is our homeland. And if you close your eyes, and imagine what it would be like to wake up tomorrow morning and there was no Israel. Well, here's the thing. The Iranians have said and have supported anyone else who subscribes to this notion, even if they don't agree with them politically or religiously. Our agenda is to annihilate Israel. They've said it over and over and over again. And until October 7th, even Israelis thought maybe that was bombast, that it was rhetoric. And October 7th changed their eyes. For one very particular reason, the Israeli military and intelligence failure that allowed the Islamist agenda to be played out by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad allowed Israelis to see for the first time that all of these threats of annihilation, that we will chase you from house to house, avenging Palestinian blood, etc., that it was real. In the same way as there were a lot of people who, up until, I would say, the German occupation of Prague, not just Munich, but Prague, when they broke all of their promises, they realized, you know what? This is not good. He's not going to be satisfied, and there is going to be war. But it took this moment of recognition, like December 7th. Up until December 7th, the majority of Americans wanted to stay out of the war. But a few thousand Americans were killed, and that changed everything. Well, if we were to look at the comparison between what happened on October 7th and what happened, let's say, on 9/11, we're talking the equivalent in the American population of the Jewish deaths in Israel were 50, 60,000 more Americans than were killed in Vietnam. And this got their attention. And they decided, whether or not anyone liked it, they're going to take matters into their own hands. They defanged Hamas, and then, in this most ingenious fashion, decapitated and dismembered what was widely considered and widely spoken of as the most powerful non-state military organization in the world. And they did it with a cleverness that is legendary for its intelligence operations and also for its military success. The net result of that is that the country that has so often said it wants to destroy Israel and is using these, I'll still call them proxies, to encircle Israel. We spoke years ago about the Einkreisungspolitik, the politics of encirclement, which eventually forces that country being encircled to break out. Israel broke out in Gaza, in Lebanon, told the Houthis, we've got this, Iraq, Syria. And because Hezbollah was the most important piece on the chessboard in terms of providing a deterrent to an Israeli attack on the nuclear installations, the Iranians could sit back rather smugly and say, the Israelis won't do it. Iran is naked. Iran is unbelievably vulnerable. Israel's strategic posture is better than it's been in decades. The entirety of Iran is open to Israeli attack. Now, whether or not they could destroy the deep underground nuclear targets, that's another matter. The United States could do that in several hours. Without breaking a sweat, the United States would be able to do that. But the Israelis have thousands of targets open to them. And Iran is ripe for some intervention. They have restive minorities, Baluchistan, Khuzestan, Kurdistan, Azerbaijan, and they have a restive population. The greatest asset of the Iranian people are Iranian women. If the useful idiots on campuses really wanted to choose an incredible cause, and if they aren't smart enough to understand that the Kurds would be a great one because we owe them a debt of gratitude for what they've done for us, what about Iranian women? The gender apartheid. Women, life, freedom. You want a cause? That's the cause. The regime is scared of its women. We should be behind them 100%. And if they need a little push by being shown that whatever they've done with proxies, Israel can do now 10 times more and provide them the air cover that they need, this is a moment. I was at Harvard a few days ago talking to the intelligence fellows that we have there at a program that we created. Arabs, Israelis, Americans, French, Aussies, Brits. And I said, here's an interesting moment for you. It's not a counterfactual. We're not going to play that game. I'm just going to ask you, pull yourself away and imagine it's 10 years from now. And now I want you to look back on this moment, November 2024. You're a Lebanese. Israel has now done something unbelievable. It has given, through the destruction, or at least the degradation of Hezbollah, it's given you the opportunity to regain your sovereignty. Up until now, you've been an Iranian colony. How will history judge you if you don't take advantage of that moment? It's not a counterfactual. It's actually saying, I want to detach myself and focus on this moment. I want to be, as they say, present. Here's another one. You look back and you say, Iran, which up until a few months ago had Hezbollah as the sword at Israel's throat, the proximity, the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of missiles. And the Israelis did something which was, if it were in the Bible, would be viewed as being, okay, they probably made that one up. Seriously. If some of the things that the Israelis did were in the Bible, people would have said, those Jews, they know how to tell a great story. The irony, of course, is that when you make the biblical references, how many of us actually know that the only non-Jew, non-Hebrew in the Old Testament who is regarded as a Messiah is a Persian? A Persian. The Iran that wants to destroy Israel is as far removed from traditional Persian values. Cyrus the Great not only allowed the Jews to return from Babylonian captivity to Zion, but also began the process with his successor Darius of rebuilding the temple. The temple that the Romans destroyed was built by the Persians. We gain so much from our experience with the Persians. And very often, I find that in discussions with people, they say, we have to remember when we're negotiating with the Iranians that they're the heirs to a great civilization. And my comment to that, as a Persophile, someone who reads Hafez, Sadi, Ferdowsi, Rumi, Omar Khayyam for pleasure, is that I say if to give those gangsters in Tehran the benefit of being the heirs to this great Persian civilization is like saying that the Nazis were the rightful heirs to Goethe and Beethoven. This is a regime that must go. And we have the sword at their throat. Now, that can be used different ways. Maybe the new administration, they're not into regime change. If we don't use this as a moment to dismantle the proxies, to allow Lebanon to be properly disarmed, Hezbollah to be properly disarmed, and to make sure that the Iranian nuclear genie is put back in the bottle, this could be the epic tragedy of our era. The women of Iran are there. They are their greatest asset. The minorities are there. And candidly, I think that the Persian heartland really wants to see the end of this. If the administration has any agenda with regard to Iran, it should be using, as Clausewitz would say, the leverage of military power to achieve a political end. You want to make a deal with Iran? Make it, because you've put a gun to their head. Because that's what they've been doing to the West, to Israel, and to our Gulf Arab allies for decades. And now they are wide open for a new discussion where, as in The Godfather, either their brains or their signature goes on that piece of paper. They don't deserve anything more. Do they?
You speak gold, my dear. I cannot agree more. You speak gold.
Can you imagine the Middle East liberated from the Iranian oppression? The Iranian oppression, by the way, which supported the agenda of Hamas and Hezbollah and all those who never wanted to see peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. You want to see a Palestinian state? Deal with Iran. That's the address. That's the mothership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Lebanon is not defeated. Lebanon is liberated. Now, is in the process of being liberated. And if I were Lebanon, if I were a citizen of Lebanon 1 year from here, I would say certainly what the German president von Wiesacker said a few years after the 1945, 10 years after, maybe a little more. He said the defeat of Nazism was not a defeat, was a liberation. He said that, liberation of Germany. So the defeat of Hezbollah, which is already consumed, it's virtually done, means the liberation of Lebanon.
What can the traditional protector of Lebanon, France, do to enable this? When Macron went to Lebanon after the explosion in Beirut, he very forcefully said, Hezbollah, you have to choose. Are you Iranian or are you Lebanese? Where's France now on this issue?
It's not in my... as you know, there is an usage which is not to say bad about your country.
I'm not asking you to say anything bad.
When you are abroad. When I am abroad, I'm very careful, by courtesy. But...
I can let you stop there if you want.
But
I can release you.
But I'm not sure that my country understands as well as us tonight on this stage the stakes in that game. When we make the difference between the political wing and the military wing of Hezbollah, I'm not sure that we are right on the point, to say the least. And protecting Lebanon today should mean praying, crossing fingers for the full defeat, the full capitulation of those who colonized Lebanon under the flag of Iran, under the authority of Iran, who are the Hezbollah. It should mean that. That's clear. And all the decent lovers of freedom whom I know in Lebanon wish that. They wish for that. They pray for that. Does France understand it? I'm not sure.
Well, let's hope that...
Let's hope.
But
what I believe, Tom, is that, to conclude all that we said and all that you just said about Iran, I believe in general that history is never written, of course. I despise the pessimists in general who say that history can only go worse and worse. And I despise the optimists who think that the world can only go better and better. I despise them equally because they are both wrong, because they both believe in an history which is like a sort of theorem, algebraic theory. But there are moments where you feel that something is occurring. And I believe that I am optimistic at this moment. I really believe that Israel is winning this war on 7 fronts. I really believe that Iran has 2 swords on the throat. Israel weapons, and the women. They are a sword also on the regime. I really believe that Iran is in the situation today in which was the former Soviet Union, Russia, in 1988. I remember so well that moment. 9th of November, by the way, 1989. It is another 9th of November, the fall of the wall in Berlin. Nobody believed in that 2 weeks before, not only 1 year, 2 weeks before. Nobody believed. Again, I will betray my promise. My president, François Mitterrand, made a trip in East Germany 4 days before the fall of the wall of Berlin, on 5th of November. He went to East Berlin, and he said, Germany is separated forever. East Germany will last forever. I suppose right of President Ulbricht or Honecker, I don't remember, 4 days after he was denied. So really, history is undecipherable, except that at some moments, when you cherish liberty, when you genuinely love those who bear it as a flag and a torch, you feel something. And I feel that we are in the situation where regarding Iran, regarding the Middle East, where we were regarding the former Soviet Union on the 5th of November 1989, at the verge of something very important. So we are at the perestroika, and we are heading to the fall of the wall.
So you see a day when our beloved Masih Alinejad and Kambiz can return to Iran in triumph?
I know that they are at this moment in our dear Masih and our dear Kambiz, they are facing very difficult time because they listened, they heard that they are targeted by serious threat on their death. Two threats at this minute, 2 agents of Iran in America these days. We just read that in the New York Times, in order to kill President Trump and Masih Alinejad. This was the news of last week. So they are in a very difficult moment. I know it was a shock for them to learn that, but I believe, yes, that in a near future, they will overcome that. They will prevail, and they will more than prevail. They will triumph. I am deeply convinced of that.
If I may conclude.
You are at home.
This
Please,
is my home.
I know.
This is my home.
I know.
It is indeed. The 92nd Street Y is one of the world's great beacons of Jewish humanism, open to all religions, ethnicities, cultures, political views. It is indeed my home. And it has been the source of some of my greatest friendships. In addition to what David Petraeus calls the greatest concentration of intellectual capital in New York, it's a place where people can meet and candidly fall in love. So one of the questions that I was asked here, which I decided to save to the end, was, how did you two meet?
How did I?
How did we meet?
Yeah.
Well, here's a little story. One day, my wife's mother, Mira Recanati, who was and remains an avowed fan of the great Charlie Rose, who interviewed on our stage well over 120 times, great friend of the 92nd Street Y. He was on air, and at his table was Bernard-Henri Lévy. And Mira saw you on television, and she'd actually seen you come to Israel decades ago and proclaimed you the most gorgeous man she'd ever seen. But more than that, being an intellectual herself, she said the conversation between you both was so elevated. And she knew I knew Charlie because I'd introduced him here at the Y, etc. And she said, you need to get to know Bernard-Henri Lévy. You're going to be great friends. And I said, so basically, the Charlie Rose show is sort of like a buffet for my meeting people? And she said, exactly. Well, we know that the most dangerous place in the world is getting between a Jew and a buffet. So I asked a couple of friends here at the Y, Ranagam and Tain Rosenbaum, who knew you, if they could make an introduction. And we met in my apartment in Paris. And we bonded, again, over the Kurds, over a Muslim minority that I'd always had an affinity for and that you were the foremost advocate for in the Western world. And that was the beginning, really, of not only just a tremendous friendship, a tremendous brotherhood. We often say that if we had a family crest, it would be both of us back to back with swords drawn. And it's much more than that. It's a fraternity. It's a camaraderie, indeed a latent life relationship of this kind. And if I may say so, speaking for myself, really one of the greatest love stories I've ever experienced.
You don't speak for yourself, you speak for both of us. And there is one missing person tonight. Your wife is here, my wife is here, but there is one missing. Mira Recanati.
Exactly.
Alas. Next time. Thank you, Tom.
With that,
and my daughter is here, Justine.
Justine is here, and Ariel.
I said my wife.
Yes, quite right.
Our wives, Ariel
wives,
and Daphne.
Our wives.
And Justine.
And both of them are perfectly comfortable with this love story. I just wanted to be said, you know, what happens at the Y stays at the Y. It's all good. I'd just like to take a moment just to impress upon all of you. I have the great privilege of being with this fellow, a comrade in arms, multiple causes that we both support together. But I also want you to just take into account a moment. The Jewish community all over the world is indeed at a crossroads, as you've said. And there are many of us who ask, what can we do to make a difference? And I do want to say that I do believe that in the coming months and years, you're going to see a pushback by the Jews to be able to reclaim their rightful place. We too had our October 7th in this country as a community. We are recovering from it. But to all of those who would point to Israel and the war in Gaza, for example, or even in Lebanon, and talk about what's going on there, let's just remember one thing. Hamas started the war. Hamas could have surrendered at any time. They knew that the Israelis would not execute prisoners, and they could have spared their people something that could have been resolved without a shot. But that's the difference. There's nobody out there protesting against Hamas. There's nobody out there in Gaza protesting against Hamas. And you're talking tens of thousands of lives because Hamas embedded themselves within their own population. Now contrast that. Just remember this, and tell your children this too. You want to know the difference between us and our enemies? Our enemies use their people as shields to be killed and to be martyred. The late Hassan Nasrallah said, we will defeat the Jews because we have the advantage. We crave death and they love life. He was wrong. But more than that, is there any... Imagine a split screen and the juxtaposition of Hamas using women and children as shields and tens of thousands of Israelis marching to bring back 200 hostages, putting everything on the line, even in war. If there is no greater dichotomy between what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be someone who is antithetical to our values, let that split screen stay with you. Tell your children, this is who they are, this is who we are, and damn it, be proud. with that, just remember, you spent time with Bernard-Henri Lévy, one of the most magnificent Jews of his generation.